Yeah, hey, greetings, guys. I'm in sunny Finland. It's 7 degrees and raining here, but sometimes I have to come back home as well. We were actually in a farm, in our reference farm in Finnish countryside, so that's why I'm in a car. I wasn't timing it correctly, but I hope you hear me right and you see the presentation.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, so I'll continue where Bob left off, and actually many of the things that Bob said, I can completely confirm or agree on them. And in this case, we have focused on the what we call a small scale, which we define from 10 tons to 100 tons of bio waste a month upcycling in one location. And I'll show you concrete cases and some business metrics and analytics. Of course, they relate to our Manna containers in a 20 foot size for breeding and rearing size, but I try to be as concrete as possible. So we've been doing this for 5 years now. In practice, we started as our own customers, insect farmers, and without any technology, we tried to solve all different challenges, from going to the local warehouse and hardware stores to buy stuff and see what works and what doesn't work before we started to see that what should we develop. And eventually we ended up developing a design on how to repurpose shipping containers and what kind of equipment are a optimal capacity that can be bought still from local hardware stores. And then we developed our control unit and software that takes over the climatization of the container automatically, so that you don't have to worry about it. And now we have deployed in 4 continents so far, and the 5th continent in North America is basically waiting our 110 volt version to be tested first. These pictures that I always show in our webinars, and we do want to always highlight that we think it's good to start at micro level. It's cheap, you can do it in a very small setup, but it's very important to learn in practice instead of just watching YouTube videos and these, because you have to get your own idea what are the important metrics and what are not, and you can always do it in your backyard or in a small greenhouse, even in Finland in here when it's minus 30 outside. Half the year. And then you can move to what I would call mini, which is that about 10 tons a month, and you're still a very low investment cost. And then to small, which I already consider like a business opportunity for a small business or a farmer doing it as a side. And then you have 2 options which are rarely talked about. You can either go decentralized and have these smaller units and then just spread them around. Then of course an option to go to a bigger plant where you have your own set of challenges and own set of possibilities and customers. So I'll talk more on the left side here and the metrics related to this, let's say a smaller scale. And the thing we have noticed is that, of course, when you start insect farming, the main thing people talk about as a business is selling the larvae for animal feed. And that's definitely one use case. But we have noticed that in a smaller scale and in a container context, if you're thinking, how do I make value out of this investment and operational costs using black soldier fly larvae, you can start thinking, say, more freely as
Ykä?
larvae and brass, but you can also sell them the capacity.
Ykä, sorry,
you can,
your connection,
actually,
yeah, your connection is breaking, so make sure you stay connected. So.
Okay, yeah, good to let me know. But you're okay. So I don't think I have a video on, so I hope that helps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have another option here. So yeah, just say if it goes too bad. But yeah, you can. So we have been working with our customers and partners, defining multiple ways to utilize black soda fly larvae and this smaller scale setup to find ways to produce value, meaning a livelihood and revenue. And there are many different options which we do want to also share and acknowledge, instead of just focusing on selling the larvae in itself, even though of course that's one of the main reasons why this is done. Another is also that how do you increase, especially in a smaller scale, how do you increase the value of your product? How much can you do post-processing, productization of the larvae? Are you just selling live larvae to the grower, which at least in our case, they always compare it to soy or cornmeal or maize price. That's the kind of high end. The higher that is, the of course more you can make profit, but that's the one that you're competing against in growing. But then you have chicken hobbies, you have exotic pet owners that of course smaller quantity, low prices are of course much higher. And then on the frass, it's the same thing. You have those who do it as a hobbyist and consumers way to farmers. You have a lot of options that, depending on how much you have and what is locally available. And it all, of course, comes down to what kind of bio-waste sources you have available and in your area, and how good they are with the larvae. Are they nutritious enough, and do you have to pay for it or not? And for CAPEX and OPEX, basically CAPEX is the investment cost, OPEX is the running cost. What I'm trying to advocate and calculate, but eventually, I think Bob said it also, it eventually comes down to how much does it cost for you to produce 1 kilo of live larvae and frass, because eventually from there on, you want to make money out of that, and regardless of the method, basically you are at the comparable level at that stage. And I'll show you now concrete examples of a few different setups. So this is a minimal setup. In our case, where actually the breeding, rearing, and the nursing and rearing are happening inside one container. So basically you need one container, a little bit storage, and a small crusher and a small vibrating sieve, and maybe an oven drying or rotating drum. And you have an option to sell live larvae, dried larvae, frass, and then eggs as a business model. And then of course handle bio-waste, but of course not a huge amounts. But this setup already with a 3-day labor, the OPEX is around $500 to $600, a little bit depending on the country and the labor cost. And the revenue is $1,200 to $1,300. So you can make a $600 to $700 monthly gross profit with 3 days of work, and your production cost of live larvae frass is between $15 to $20 cents a kilo. So based on that, you can of course then value different products and who will buy. I think in many developing countries, the price of live larvae is somewhere between $500 to $600 a ton. So $50 to $60 cents a kilo. So this is kind of like a starter case where we typically start, and you really don't need that much infra. And then modularly, you can then build it up, separating breeding and nursing, and then rearing to get the maximum capacity out of the rearing container. Maybe you have a little bit bigger crusher or a little bit automated pre-processing, so you can handle about 3 tons of waste per day. But this is basically the same setup otherwise, and your labor is still within a one-man show, but now you're talking about $6,000 monthly revenue and a little bit higher gross profit, because basically with the same investment and depreciation costs almost, you just have a larger output. And then you can modularly build it to what we call like the largest size, small scale, which is 100 tons upcycling capacity. But actually, you're not investing into a bigger set of pre and post processing equipment because you're basically using the same capacity every day. Now you just have more days. So now we're talking about $30,000 monthly revenue with about like 70% gross profit, which means that then of course there's some additional cost of taxes and rental and a few other things that you have to deduct from that. But this gives you an idea that how you can grow from doing about 4 tons a month to 100 tons a month without having like a huge steps of investments between these while increasing the production. And this is about a 2-man show, 1 + 1, where another one doesn't need to be full time. And we actually did ourselves a 6 container, 30 ton a month setup ourselves here in Finland. When we go into the cost side, I have two kind of like a comparable setups to calculate the OPEX. And in a case of OPEX, we actually do include the container depreciation and loan costs as part of the OPEX. As I think in here, it's the container depreciation, which is this 10% part here. So in a developed country, we're talking $3,000 a monthly cost of a full-time employee. Typically, because our legislation restricts the use case of real bio-waste. So the substrate we need to use have already use cases. So $40 to $50 a ton of that substrate is a realistic price. The electricity has gone down now, definitely, but we cannot really use solar panels here that much. So we need to buy the electricity, and I highlighted 2 options for a good principle of if you do it yourself, it could be even lower, but that's a good estimate. And if you would buy, and with the shipping cost and everything, it could be even up to $4 a gram. You can see how the cost of eggs at some point start to be a very dominant part of your costs. And you can see here that even in a Western context, you can make a kilo of live larvae at about 25 cents. And keeping in mind, this is our context and our containers, which we have been very comfortable. It's very hard for us to know in other methods what these numbers are, but at least we are giving like a reference to you to compare to other ways. But if you increase the cost of eggs, you can easily see that the OPEX can go higher. And in a developing country context where in this case the labor is less, even this is about $1,000 a month. I know that there's even possibility for a less cost of employee, but typically the bio-waste, the legislation allows much higher range of bio-waste options. So typically you pay for the logistics, you can use manure and these kind of things. So the bio-waste cost is less, and the electricity, you can use solar panels, so you can halven the cost of electricity or even be completely off-grid in our container case. I used about the same egg price, but I think like we have calculated in our that the eggs should be like $20 cents a gram if you do it locally. So the OPEX is like half what it is in developed country, and also the cost of producing live larvae. And of course, I'm very interested to know how others have done it, or what is the outdoor cost of larvae and these to compare. But you can see that in typical setup, the pie chart of the cost structure is pretty even, but when the other cost starts to be lower, of course the eggs start to dominate also in that case. So if you're thinking like how to minimize costs, typically it comes down to eggs, or then the depreciation and the loan costs. how we many cases or most of our cases and contacts come from a very, let's say, little background in BSF. So we do encourage at the beginning to check your country, like talk to animal farmers. What is the kind of the cost point or pain point of cost that they would be willing to pay and switch to any other comparable feed? What are the let's say the sellers, and then what other bio-waste sources are available in that? And then of course, is there a restrictive legislation or other bureaucracy that would either stop it or at least make it one more let's say more costly to do? And also, are there other companies doing it in your area and entrepreneurs, so you can see an example what are the prices in your country or in a neighboring country and so on. And then, like I said in the beginning, to start always take 10 trays, watch webinars and YouTube videos, and that's why we of course want to give our at least approach and start, because then it's much easier for you to talk and comment on different things when you've done it yourself. I really like to put my hands into larvae at least once a week. And that allows you to create a business plan also, and a that is feasible for you to get funding from government and even investors. And this just gives you an idea. Our container, which you can use for breeding or rearing or both. For rearing, it can convert in an annual, like a yearly, about 120 tons of bio-waste into 20 tons of live larvae and 20 to 40 tons of fertilizer or grass. I mean, depends a lot. The running power consumption is in typical cases less than 1 kilowatt in a 20-foot container. And of course, we're happy to help in any ways. Typically, we start with consultancy and then move on to a first turnkey container. And we do a little bit different, I think, in many cases, that we actually, with the first container, we train the customer to build those containers and source them locally as much as possible. And then we deliver the, let's say, the brains and software solution and the training material. Okay. Thank you very much. I hope you heard something during that presentation and I wasn't talking to myself for 15 minutes.